Welcome back to another episode of Estate Planning Nightmares and How to Avoid Them. I'm your host, John Braddock, the author of Click Here When I Die, and the founder of My Life and Wishes, the Legacy Vault, an online planning and document storage solution created to make things easier for those you love. Today, I'm extremely excited to welcome back a good friend of the show, a returning guest who continues to inspire, challenge, and transform the world of estate planning. My guest today is Laura Cowan. And if you don't know her yet, buckle up. Laura is not only an award winning estate planning attorney and CPA, but also a visionary entrepreneur, speaker, and author of the Amazon international bestseller, Lifestyle Lawyer Revolution. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Laura built a seven-figure law firm from the ground up in just 3 years and did so during the pandemic. She pivoted her entire business model to serve her clients virtually, working just a few hours a day while maintaining a thriving practice. Sounds pretty good. That pivot became the foundation of her revolutionary course, the 2-Hour Lifestyle Lawyer, which has helped hundreds of attorneys across the country redefine success, create more freedom, and build highly profitable virtual estate planning practices. She's been featured multiple times in the New York Times as a top woman attorney in New York, named Super Lawyer's Rising Star for 6 consecutive years. And she has spoken on estate planning topics at the United Nations headquarters. Yes, the UN. Laura also is a fellow lover of the arts, Central Park strolls, and somehow she finds time to run a fantastic podcast of her own, Beyond the Legal Pad, where she helps lawyers create careers they actually love. Now, I've known Laura for a few years now. She was on the podcast about a year or so ago. That episode was a favorite among you folks, our listeners. So I knew I had to bring her back, especially now that her book is making waves and families of high-profile celebrities like Gene Hackman and Jimmy Buffett are making headlines for all the wrong reasons when it comes to estate planning. So, Laura, welcome back to the show.
What a great intro. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, I mean, we do this next year. There's even going to be more. The intro will be even longer.
Yeah, I keep adding to it.
Well, if we're not growing, we're dying, right? So we keep
Exactly.
doing better things. So, no, I'm thrilled to have you back. And before we jump into a few topics, let's start by revisiting your journey. So you're a CPA turned attorney. You left Wall Street, built a 7-figure law firm, then flipped the whole model on its head. And now you help other lawyers do the same. For those who haven't heard your story, how did this all come about?
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting story. I'm definitely not one of those lawyers that went like kindergarten through JD. That was not my path. I worked for about 12 years after I graduated from Iowa State with a degree in accounting. And I was a CPA during that time, and like you said, did a whole bunch of different things on Wall Street and working for various companies. And then decided later in life to go to law school. So I was 35 when I went to law school, which seemed ancient at the time. And now I'm like, maybe it's not that old, but at the time I felt ancient. And yeah, so I went to the University of Minnesota Law School, and which was a great school, and I was happy to be there. And then decided to open my own practice at age like 40, which, in retrospect, it feels kind of crazy, but it was actually probably the best thing I ever did, because we were talking earlier about being entrepreneurial, and estate planning is a really great practice area for entrepreneurial people. So yeah, and we did it in person for, the first 3, 4 years of my practice. And then March of 2020, you're exactly right. We flipped the whole thing virtual because we didn't really have a choice. And then since then, we've been doing hybrid. So that's where we are now.
No, that's fantastic. So I know you're in New York City because we're friends on Instagram and stuff, and I see your amazing posts. You go to the ballet and pictures in the fall, and it's beautiful. But it sounds like you're from the Midwest.
Yeah, that's interesting that you asked. I grew up in Iowa, which surprises a lot of people because the first thing they say is, that's really different from New York. And I'm like, I know, but I feel more at home in New York than I do Iowa. But I'm actually originally from Canada, which is kind of strange. My mom is Canadian and my dad is British. So we emigrated here when I was 5. And so I grew up in Iowa, but I've moved to New York right after college, and I've spent more time in New York than anywhere else. So this is home.
Yeah. New York City is a fun, fun place. I imagine it's a daily thrill to live there.
Anything is possible in New York, right? That's why I love it.
Exactly.
Anything's possible, good or bad.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you again for sharing that. So let's dive into a couple things. You and I were talking a couple weeks ago, and you know, two families come to mind that we talk about. One is Gene Hackman, who was like one of my favorite actors ever. From Popeye Doyle and the French Connection, and I think that's who he was. And then through the
Hoosiers, Hoosiers.
yeah yeah Hoosiers, and then the Firm with Tom Cruise, and just an amazing man. And I know that he had retired and he's in New Mexico somewhere with his wife, Albuquerque or Taos or somewhere. And then also we were talking about Jimmy Buffett, and we were talking about like some of the issues and legal complications that have surrounded that. So, and I know you know far more than I do, but without getting into like private details, what are the things that like happen there, and what's going on, and what can be the takeaways for the rest of us?
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about the Gene Hackman case, there's a few things that are interesting. He did have an estate plan. He had a will, and I believe a living trust. But which is good, but it was 30 years old, which isn't good. So that brought up some issues. Are these still his wishes? It was, I guess, good in the sense that there was no concern. Did he have capacity when he signed it? Because it was 30 years old. But that's really, really old. There's been a lot of changes, and so that was an issue. I think something else that's interesting is that he and his wife passed away. My understanding is within, a couple of days of each other. And there's a 30-year age difference there. And Gene was, I think, 95 and his wife was 65. So that's not an instance where you would imagine even the possibility of dying at the same time. Right, right. Usually the woman lives
Exactly.
longer, and so she might have had like another 30 years. So in any event, that simultaneous death clause, what happens if we die within a few days of each other? That was part of his plan, which was good, but the not having any recent updates is bad.
Yeah, and so often people say, yeah, I've done my estate plan, I've got a trust and these kind of things. And, my second question always is, do you sit down with your attorney at least every couple of years and review things? And so many people say to me, oh, no, it's done. It's like, wow, I don't know. Over the last 2 years, I might have wanted to, maybe cut a couple of my kids out, you never know. Life changes, right?
Well, what else changes is the law. It's just something that a lot of people don't realize, and I probably wouldn't have thought about either before I went to law school. But the laws govern your will and your trust and your other estate planning documents, and sometimes those laws change. So that's another great reason to meet with an attorney. I would say have a relationship with your estate planning attorney and at least just check in once a year. If they've got a maintenance program, that'll be part of the maintenance program. But just to make sure the documents that you have still reflect your life, your assets, maybe a new law. Because otherwise you end up with the Gene Hackman situation where 30 years go by and now they don't work so well.
Right. And, and you don't think about it. I mean, if you have something, I mean, I'm sure Gene Hackman over the course of that 30 years, if he purchased a new home, maybe had rental properties, other investments, and maybe he failed to title them in the name of the trust. And I know a pour over will can go so far, but it can go only so far, right?
Yeah, the pour over will helps. It acts as a safety net. So if there were assets that Mr. Hackman didn't retitle into his trust, whether inadvertently or for whatever reason, the pour over will does act as that safety net to pour them into the trust. They might still have to go through probate though, which is the whole point of doing a living trust is to avoid that. So
Right. Yeah, that's why we do trusts, right? It's to preserve assets, transfer wealth, and keep our families out of court. But if at the end of the day they wind up going to court, and I can only imagine if an estate like Gene Hackman's or Jimmy Buffett has to be probated, that's going to cost a lot of money.
It is. It is going to cost a lot because they those are high value estates, and usually, the fees are sort of tied to the value of the estate. It's also going to be public. This is something that a lot of people don't realize when they're thinking about their estate planning. We think of drawing up a will and then having it be this really private, no one can see this thing while we're alive, especially. And the irony is that your will gets filed down to the probate court when you pass away, and anyone can go look at it, which 90% of my clients are shocked to hear that. So if privacy is important for you, a trust is a better option.
Right. And, again, a celebrity, and, we've seen them through the years. I mean, Prince, Aretha Franklin, all these things. Um,
Heath Ledger.
yeah, right. And what's amazing is, people think, okay, well, these are uber wealthy people and that kind of stuff. I've got a will, but I don't have a lot of stuff, and it won't be that big of a deal. But what I've heard is that even the guy that works at the Firestone tire shop down the road. I mean, he's got a home, he's got some assets and things, and if he's got a will, it's still going to probate. And depending on what state they're in, that could take a year to 2 years, and family won't have access to any of those things that they wanted to pass on. And I'm sure in New York City it's different than it is down here in Scottsdale, Arizona, but it can cost 20, $30,000.
Yeah, and that's going to come out of the estate. So what we tell people is, it's different in every state, and it's going to be different depending on what you own. And is it real estate? Is it life insurance? But it's important to meet with an attorney licensed in your state so they can kind of walk you through, this is how it's going to look for you if you pass away in California or New York, just depending, because a lot of people don't realize the state laws are different in every state as well. So, just having a basic understanding of how you can opt out of what the state default rules are for you, because every state's got their law of intestacy, and that's just, that's the rules. So estate planning is opting out.
Yeah, here's a question that just like popped in because I'm always 35,000 foot of ADHD. So you mentioned that. So what happened? Because states do have different rules, right? And if you die in a different state, so let's say I live in Wisconsin and I have my estate plan there, but I also own property in Arizona and I'm a snowbird and I go back and forth. Does it matter which state I actually die in?
So it doesn't. You'll have one state that you file your income taxes in, right? That's
Yeah,
the one that decides. So, let's say you spend most of the year in Wisconsin, but you're in Florida for the summer, I guess for the winters. I'm going to Florida in the summer. You go to Florida in the winters, right? You pass away in Florida, your estate plan is going to be a Wisconsin estate plan because that's where you're a resident.
governed where it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for those that are thinking about taking up residency somewhere else, talk to your estate planning attorney and find out is that state going to be better than this one if I die in that?
Yeah, and it's going to be there's going to be the income tax analysis, which one's better. And then maybe there'll be an estate tax analysis. Some states have an estate tax, some don't. So this is why,
Yeah.
it just shows estate planning is kind of a combination of your CPA might want to get involved, and your insurance agent, your financial advisor, they all kind of tie together.
Yeah, it really is. It's teamwork to have all those people on board with the same agenda, know what the end goals are, and work together. So, do you know with the Hackman estate, um, was there family? Is there going to be things that are contested here? Have you heard much yet? I know it's still fresh.
Yeah, I haven't heard much. I think that they have named a successor trustee of the trust. It's kind of cranking its way, through the courts. And I would have to refresh my memory on what was left to different people. Well, we'll have to see. There might be some arguing between his children.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I remember when a lot of the stuff was going on with Prince. I mean, there were women coming out of the woodwork saying that he fathered a child and now they had a claim.
And that's what happens is you've got to like find all of the heirs, whoever they may be, and so maybe there's some that are coming out of the woodwork for sure. And it happens obviously in big estates like that, but I think you would be surprised if we all just kind of think about our own families and kind of the turmoil and, you don't have to have a lot of money to have people fighting, right? So we're talking about big dollar amounts here, but even when there's not a lot of money, in fact, oftentimes what you see people fighting over are the things that don't really cost very much or they're not worth very much, but it has a lot of sentimental value.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember, and obviously I speak with a lot of estate planning attorneys on the podcast, and within the last couple of months, I interviewed someone I can't remember. I apologize if you're listening, um, but it was not a wealthy estate, um, but there really weren't any close heirs or living relatives and stuff, and they had to do a search, and it turned out there was something like 45, might have been more, it might have been like 70, but the 45 sticks in my mind, heirs that they had to contact and get in touch with. And this thing took like forever. I'll have to go back and dig that up. And if I find
Yeah.
it, I'll put it in the bottom of the show notes and apologize again to whomever it
Uh,
was that
when
shared
you're
the story.
blanking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it can get pretty complicated pretty fast, is what I would say. And when your attorney's billing by the hour, you hit a couple snags and then the bill starts to go up. So,
Exactly. Well, hey, you had mentioned something to me also the other day about Jimmy Buffett, and I know he passed a couple of years ago. Um, what was going on with that estate and
yeah, what I
other
think
claims?
I know that was an interesting one as well. So it sounds like he had a revocable living trust. He had nominated a trustee to manage this $275 million estate that he left behind, I believe, to his wife. But apparently the trustee is not, according to her, providing an accurate accounting and is not happy with the, I think, less than 1% return that they're getting on the 275 million, which would be something that I would be suspicious about as well. So we'll see what happens. That's what they're saying. But it just sort of points out estate planning is not just about saying, okay, everything goes to my wife when I die. Jimmy Buffett must have also chosen a trustee to be in charge of that. And now it looks like there's some conflict between the trustee and his wife. So things can get messy even when you do have all the paperwork in place.
Yeah, because I think what I was reading about is like he was trying to get all this information from the trustee on the assets, and like you say, I mean, $275 million. I mean, unimaginable sum of money for a lot of us to even imagine. But he was telling her that there wasn't enough coming out of that for her to be able to live each year because it was only like $2 million, and that was above her lifestyle and living expenses. Which again, I think I'd get by on that
Right.
if I had to, right? But yeah, I mean, that's like 1%. So
It's a
either
valid
somebody's,
question.
yeah, somebody's playing around with the books somewhere, or whoever the investment firm is horrible if they're not
Right.
getting, at least 4 or 5% easily on
Yeah,
275.
yeah, and this is the sort of thing that you don't necessarily, when you're piecing together your own estate plan, you're not necessarily thinking this far ahead, like how are people going to invest the resources. But now that Jimmy Buffett is gone, it's completely reasonable for his spouse to be asking, why is the return less than 1%? And that's when the court gets back involved and whatnot. So who you pick in the different roles is really important. Your beneficiaries, your trustees, your guardians, right? They all have a different job.
Yeah. Don't, don't pick your one child who has filed bankruptcy 3 times to be, uh, you know, administering the finances, right? Or
Yeah.
in
Or
my case, I'm not going to point my daughters, as while I'm alive as my healthcare power of attorney, because even though they would know what I want and it's written out, they'd have trouble pulling the trigger, so to speak.
that's right. you look at all the different roles and you have to think about who would be good. And one of the other examples is nominating people as the guardian of your minor children. You might have one person in mind for that, or one couple, and then you might have someone else who would be really, really great at investing the money. It's two different people. You're allowed to do that. Are they going to now butt heads? That's something to think about, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, but that's the kind of counseling that a lawyer's going to go through with you. It's more than just plopping names into a forum. You want to start to think about how are they going to interact with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are critical pieces. Again, we've been talking about Hackman and Buffett, right? But all these things are essential for anyone when they're putting it together. I mean, who are the guardians of your kids? And if you're funding your trust with life insurance, who are you going to put in charge of handling that money to make sure it lasts and is given to the guardians to provide for you know, the welfare of the children?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly. These are all things that you'll talk through. There's a lot of interesting pieces that I think that, people just aren't familiar with. But when they sit down with me at my office and we start talking about the different things that can go wrong, but then also the different things that we can do to put everything in place so it doesn't go wrong. So it's people leave happy. We're not trying to scare anyone away, but it's important to know what can go wrong and how you can fix it.
yeah. What I love most, I think, about estate planning and estate planning attorneys and what your job is. It is the only, well, maybe not the only, but the only one I can think of, practice area law that is proactive. We're trying to prevent things from happening, right? All the other areas of law, best I can think of, are pretty much reactive, you know, unless it's contract law, and then no one's ever getting a contract done because lawyers are just going to lawyer it up both sides and no one's going to want to sign anything.
It is proactive, and that's why it can be challenging getting people to do it. You don't see the benefits right away. But something else we've been speaking to our clients about, this whole idea that trusts are only for the wealthy. And we're really trying to educate our community into understanding that, trusts are a tool that anyone should use if they want to really put some guardrails and protections in place. And, we tend to think, someone who's leaving $1 million to their kids in trust, well, those kids are going to have a pretty good starting point, right? They've got this money, it's there, it's protected, it's going to be used for something good, like starting a business. If you leave your child, even if it's only 50,000, and I don't want to imply that that's not a lot of money, but even if it's just 50,000, if you leave that outright, what are the odds that's going to be used to build a business or, to do something that kind of gets you ahead? So it's not the amount of money. I think that you're really kind of setting your kids up for success by thinking about this kind of planning, even if you're not leaving a lot behind.
Right, right. And yeah, I mean, I remember when I was, in my early 20s or so, if, God forbid my parents had died and I just was left outright $50,000 by the end of that year, I'd probably be back to zero, you
You
know?
would. And then what would happen is you'd roll around to 35 and you'd be thinking, gosh, I wouldn't mind starting a business. I wish I had that 50 grand, but it'll be long gone.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And I know in a lot of estate plans, it can be very specific. You can put trigger points in, upon my passing, if they're above the age of 18, they'll get this little piece. Yeah, but then the next installment or disbursement from the trust will be, you know, maybe if they go to college to fund college, or when they buy a home or when they get married or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, and then you can change, those are moving targets. You can change them. So if you've got one child who's super responsible and one maybe isn't, this is what we're getting at. The documents can be tweaked over time, and they should be tweaked over time.
Yeah, the updates.
Yep.
Don't wait 30 years. I mean, I think most listeners know the story that after Michelle's father had died and we finally found the will, and understand this was, we were in our early 50s when this happened. We found the will, and I said, hey, I found the will. She said, great news. And I said, but there's bad news. And she said, what's that? I said, well, you have to move to Milwaukee and live with Aunt Jean and Uncle Ed, because that's the last time that had been updated, a long time ago.
That's so funny. And does she want to live in Milwaukee with Gene and Ed?
Um, Well, they might have take better care of it than I do, but who knows?
It was
But
that old though, yeah.
it was that old. I mean, some people do it; they put that paperwork together and then they don't review it and think about it, and then it's just a will that really didn't do much of anything except pass things on to uh, his wife, my mother-in-law at the time. But
Yeah, you got to
still,
keep it updated. That's why we always
still,
tell people to work with an attorney that has some kind of an update process, a way to
yeah.
stay in touch. Just to kind of get your own mind into the gear of understanding, we're not done with this. Well, you should at least check in every year. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, and I know an awful lot of firms have what they call their trust maintenance program or client care package that they charge a nominal amount. I mean, it's not going to break the bank. It's not like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to call Laura because she's going to charge me another few $1,000s. It's this minimal thing, and hey, I can reach out with questions, and we'll make minor updates and do those things, and it's you know it's 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 trust insurance.
Yeah, and doing it without thinking, oh, am I going to get a bill in the mail for 18 minutes?
Right.
$78, right? Yeah. Yeah, client care
Exactly.
programs are really great for estate planning firms, and it's a great way to keep your package updated for sure.
Oh, absolutely. All right. Well, let's switch gears. Enough about death and dying, right? Um, I want to talk about your new book, Lifestyle Lawyer Revolution. And I know you wrote this with a kind of a lawyer focus, but it seems to me that it's not really just for lawyers. It's about redefining success, kind of owning your own time and designing a career that you actually love. So what inspired you to take that step? Because as a fellow author, I know it's a time consuming process.
It is time consuming, and it's funny that you said that because my dad, who's a physician, actually said the same thing. He's like, I read it and I know it's for lawyers, but I actually found like there was a lot of information in there that was good for anyone. Yeah, I wanted to write a book that number one just sort of acknowledged the reality that I feel like it's not really being acknowledged, which is this underwritten, this underlying rule, unspoken rule that lawyers are supposed to act in a certain way and work in a certain way. And if you want to be a good lawyer, you've got to do things a certain way. And I think we've really seen a big change. It's been 5 years now. I can't believe since COVID happened. But so we're kind of past yeah, we're all working virtually. We all know that. But I think there's still a mindset shift that needs to happen. What does it mean to be a good lawyer? Is it one that's working 80 hours a week? Is it one that's only at a big law firm? Let's redefine what it means to be a good lawyer. And part of that is just sort of taking control over your own, I think your own schedule and your own career, but also just having a mindset shift that you can still be a good lawyer and only do 3 or 4 estate plans per month. You're going to give those 3 or 4 estate planning clients 5-star service. But it's okay if you're not doing big law. And of course, we're not judging anyone who's working in big law. And you see as you go through the exercises that this isn't about pointing fingers or saying one way is better, but just accepting, which is a big shift for lawyers, I think. It's okay if I don't want to do what I thought I was supposed to do or what I thought I was going to do when I went to law school. Like if we can just accomplish that, I feel like the book has accomplished something. So that in and of
Wow,
itself is a big piece of it, thinking about how to be a lawyer in a different way.
that's awesome. I know so many attorneys, obviously, and have talked and heard their stories and stuff. And especially, for any of the younger ones out there just starting out, and maybe you are working for a big firm. And I don't know. I mean, do you like getting up and having to, get 1,300 billable hours in? You're working your butt off. You don't have time for a social life. You're not making much of that 1,300 billable hours yourself. And I think when you take a different mind shift to if I'm doing it on my own, and if I'm like most estate planning attorneys, maybe charging, package prices, flat fees, and don't have to be too concerned with it. Not only will you have more free time, but you'll be helping more people feel better about it. And, again, as we talked earlier, Laura, as entrepreneurs, being an entrepreneur, a lot of people are like, oh, you're an entrepreneur to make money. It's like, no, I'm an entrepreneur because it allows for freedom. And I can be free and make a little bit of money and be very, very happy, or a lot of money, be very, very happy. But the choice is mine, not someone else telling me what I have to do, right?
Oh, exactly. I can't believe I survived as long as I did. And I worked for some very good companies for some very great people. But I agree with you. Estate planning is a very good practice area for entrepreneurial attorneys because you don't have to have, it's not like patent litigation or something where you really need to have a lot of resources. You can do it as a solo. And yeah, the amount of freedom. And that's one of the things that we point out in the book. You're still going to have problems as an entrepreneurial attorney. They'll be there, but they're just going to be a different set of problems, and they're going to be a set of problems that you probably have more control over. So you have staffing issues, or you don't like the people. Well, you get to pick. You don't like where you're sitting. I mean, I remember back when I used to work. It shocks me, and I look back and I think, my God, I wasn't even allowed to pick where I sat. Right?
Yeah.
You're
Oh,
doing shares.
exactly.
Oh, there's the book.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
So
for
anyway,
the
freedom. That's the point. Is freedom.
Yeah, so for those who are watching this on YouTube and can see this, those who are listening, you can't, but I'll describe it. This is a cover of Laura's international best-selling book, Lifestyle Laura Revolution: Live a Life You Love Without Leaving Law. But what I like most about it is that picture on there of a stream, a river in the woods, a little wooden dock with your laptop. I see you took your shoes off, Laura. You probably dipped your toes in the water there. That's freedom. That's the ability to do it your own way on your own time with your own hotspot. And you could actually be sitting there one afternoon watching the sunset and still practicing law.
Exactly. And the people that you're helping on that laptop are getting the exact same Laura that they would be getting if I was sitting in my office, right? And probably a happier lawyer, Laura, because I'm not sitting in my office. But yeah, that's
I'd
the idea.
argue a better Laura, even
Yeah,
better
better
Laura.
one.
Yeah,
It's
because your
possible.
headspace, it's someone once told me if you want to be more productive, try and find an environment that makes you more productive. So vis-a-vis, I know that, early in my career, you know, in a corporate office building, in a small little office, tiny window and stuff, that doesn't inspire me much.
No.
I live in Arizona and in Scottsdale, and I have an office that's got a beautiful view out the window, and I do a lot of work literally from my backyard on my laptop because I can do this from anywhere, and I stare at beautiful mountains.
It makes a big difference. Yeah. It
It
does. And
does.
this is just the way that it's going to be in the future. So I think, embracing it, not feeling bad about it. It's going to take some time. The legal industry is changing, but I think there's a lot of opportunity as well. We've got AI, it's bringing in some stuff that's scary, but it's also improving a lot of things. So I'm not a naysayer. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for lawyers. It's just going to be a different landscape.
Absolutely. And you talk a lot about how lawyers and other professionals of all type really can get stuck, right, in the hustle harder track. So for any of our legal professionals or other professionals listening, what's the first step in shifting out of that grind?
You've got to start hiring a team, which is I know hard for other people to hear because you think like if I'm struggling to get revenue, I can't afford to hire someone. But you need to start with at least one. And in estate planning, I always tell people start off with a paralegal to help you with the drafting. And, a virtual assistant to really help you follow up with people after seminars and webinars. Just those two things alone are going to free you up because no one wants to do the tedious drafting. And, it's a big bang for your buck if you've got someone following up with workshop attendees and whatnot. Once you start to see like how much better things run when someone else is helping you, that's when you're going to start to realize how important it is to delegate. And what we teach in the program and in the course is You should be attracting leads, hosting workshops. This is our ACE model, networking, hosting workshops, and estate planning. Those things are important. And then you should be closing, and you should be consistently closing at least 70%. And then you've got the work, the drafting the documents, all the stuff that happens around it. And that part of it, the executing, should be done by someone, a paralegal, because that frees you up to go generate more business. So you can't be generating business if you're stuck in the weeds doing all the drafting. And that's the mistake that most lawyers make. So finding one really good assistant or paralegal is a good first step.
Yeah, it's invaluable. I've had several mentors through the years. One is like, figure out what your unique ability is. What are you best at? What do you enjoy doing the most? And that's where you should focus. And then what are those things that you enjoy doing the least, which I assume is after I do what I enjoy the most, which is, interviewing a client and helping them identify what they really want and all that kind of stuff. The thing I hate the worst is now I have to go back and draft those documents. But there's somebody that's their unique ability and they're very, very good at it. And if they do it, that gives me more time to be in front of those where I can express my unique abilities.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to have the energy and all of the resources that you need. So when you're sitting down in front of the client, you can really counsel them and shine. And if you're busy spending 3, 4 hours in the drafting software, that's for me anyway, that would like drain my energy. By the time I got in front of the client, I would have nothing left to give. So
And
that's why a paralegal does it for me.
right. And I know beyond your book and your own practice and things, you have a course and a program for attorneys called the 2 Hour Lifestyle Lawyer. And I'm familiar with it. I know some of your clients who are attorneys practicing law who have been through the course. Can't speak highly enough about it. But let me be devil's advocate for a minute. So, all right, I'm an estate planning attorney. And I say, Laura, that sounds amazing, but I could never run a practice in just a few hours a day. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I would say it will take more than a few hours a day to build it up for sure, right? The heavy lifting is in the beginning, getting the systems set up. And if you're new to estate planning, you're going to have to learn the law, right? That's going to take more effort. Once you get it up and running, however, 2 hours a day is 10 hours a week. And 10 hours a week is plenty to serve 3, 4 clients a month, which is about $10,000 in revenue, just, depending on what you're charging. So it doesn't start off, 2 hours a day. But the reason we like to emphasize that, although we've got many, many lawyers in the program who have said to me, I'm okay with working more than 2 hours a day. And I'm like, that's great. What we're really trying to emphasize here is the 2 hours a day and 10,000 a month. And the way that is kind of zigging when everyone else is zagging. We're not really dangling that you're going to build $1 million law firm carrot. We want to show people you can consistently make 10,000 a month profit doing estate planning, working a few hours a day. Now, if you're happy with that, which a lot of people are, then that's great. If you want to, once you've dialed that in, if you want to scale it up, now you can up your marketing budget and you've got a process that works so you can do even more than that. But a big part of it is just kind of telling lawyers, like, listen, it's okay if you only want to make 10,000 a month, which I say only because it's a huge amount of money to a lot of people.
Right. And that's the thing. Again, as we talked about, it's freedom. And so, there's a lot of attorneys that they don't want to bust their ass and grind and grind and grind. But if they can make, 120,000 a year and they've got a virtual assistant doing that, they're plenty happy. And then, if they decide they want to work 4 hours a day, well, you make 250,000. But
Right.
you have total freedom to do that. I think it's
And that's
awesome.
It is awesome. I think that's going to be the case for anything. You take some time to build it up, but once you've got it dialed in, I find it very comforting, knowing I'll always be able to do an estate plan for someone in my community, charge a good fee. If I'm only doing one client per month, that's still going to be nice revenue, and I'm always going to have it. So it's a nice tool to have in your revenue tool belt, is what I call it.
Absolutely. And when you spend, I think anyway, because I'm very customer focused, as I know you are, and your attorneys that you work with are. And when you can provide that level of service and care, you get referrals. You don't have to work harder because they say, man, the experience I had with Laura was amazing. You need to just call her, you know.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you start doing good work, word's going to get around, and the more time goes on, the ball just gets easier to push. It just starts to roll on its own if you're doing good work.
Absolutely. So powerful. Um, Laura, thank you. As always, I appreciate your clarity, your energy, your mission. Um, for those that are listening, I will put a link to Lifestyle Lawyer Revolution, her book, in the show notes, along with the link to her website for the 2 Hour Lifestyle Lawyer, um, and the link to her podcast, Beyond the Legal Pad. And if I think anyone could read the book. If you're a business person, if you feel like you're grinding and stuff, read the book. It'll at least open your eye. I mean, you can shift it into whatever business you're in. And for those attorneys out there that might be intrigued by this 2 hour lifestyle lawyer concept, um, go out to Laura's link, check it out. She does amazing work with her people. And, really, is there anything else you can add to that? Because I mean, I can talk about you and sing your praises all day. And I'm going to put all the links out there for people, but I just really encourage them to get in contact with you.
Yeah, yeah. Take a look at the book. The book is for all lawyers, not just estate planning lawyers. And if you'd like to know more about our community, just go to our website, 2hourlifestylelawyer.com. We host usually 4 cohorts per year of our signature course. So all of my information is there, and anyone who wants to reach out, just send me an email, and I'd be happy to chat.
Uh, Thank you again, Laura. It's always a privilege getting to talk to you. And I know we see each other once or twice a year at various conferences, and I'm looking forward to our next one.
Yes, I'll see you in person soon. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You're very welcome. And to you, our listeners, thank you again for tuning into another episode of Estate Planning Nightmares. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend or colleague who needs to hear it. Subscribe, give us a thumbs up. And until next time, remember, your life is your legacy. So plan ahead and make it a great day.